am your host today, Connie Moss, and we are talking about reinforcers today. What are they? How do you use them correctly? And the big question everybody seems to ask is, when can you stop using them? Reinforcers are really the centerpiece of positive reinforcement training. We use them to teach the dog to do the behavior. It really sort of helps you shift your focus as well. So instead of focusing on stopping your dog from doing the wrong thing, the things I don't want my dog to do, instead you're focused on, what do I want my dog to do instead? And how can I reinforce my dog so that happens more often? Reinforcers, at least for the sake of our conversation today, are usually paired with a marker. So you might think, well, what is a marker? My guess is you probably already know what a marker is, you just didn't realize there was a name for it. It's when you say yes or okay or a clicker. So you ask the dog to sit, the dog sits, you say yes, that's the marker. And then you immediately follow up with a reinforcer. So the marker tells the dog, yes, you got it right, and yes, you're about to get a reinforcer. So in my mind, I'm thinking of reinforcers in 3 different groups. I'm thinking of food, toys, and the PREMAC principle. So the first group, let's look at these a little closer, is the food group. It's the biggest group. There's so many options in this group of reinforcers. It's easy to use, very instinctual for us humans. Most dogs will work for things in this group, and we can use different levels of food to reinforce our dog for calm behavior or more exciting behavior, depending on what we're looking for. The next group are the toys. So these require a little bit more handler finesse. You need to be good at managing your dog and managing the toys, pulling them in and out of your pocket. That does require a little bit more finesse. Also, toys definitely bring up a dog's energy level. And you may be thinking, well, why would I want to do that? And all I can tell you is think of sports. Sports is the biggest place for us to want to bring up a dog's energy level. Think of that really flashy, fancy heel that you sometimes see in the obedience shows. That could be achieved by bringing up the dog's energy using toys as reinforcers. You can use food too, really high value food. But toys would be one way to bring up that excitement level to get that dog to perform really flashy, nice behaviors. In sports, we're always riding that line between high energy, flashy, and not so high that they can't think straight anymore. I don't want my dog out in the stratosphere of excitement. I want my dog up there, but I don't want them too crazy. So toys can help you modulate that depending on how you use the toys. Toys do require a little more work on the front end in order to teach your dog to share. So before you even use toys as a reinforcer, I suggest you start with teaching your dog how to share the toy with you so that they will give it back so that they can work for it again. And that does require a little work to teach first. And not every dog is going to work for toys. You can change that, but again, that's going to require work on the front end. The next group is the PREMAC principle. So this is a trickier group. It's a lesser known group as far as naming out the reinforcers. But again, just like the marker, I bet you know this group and you just didn't realize there was a name for it. So the PREMAC principle was theorized by David Premack back in 1965. He did this, I think he was working with monkeys. Basically, he came up with this theory that low probability behavior is more likely to happen when it is followed by high probability behavior. So what that means is eat your peas and you can have dessert. It's called the grandma's rule. That's a nickname for this. The grandma's rule. It just means you do this for me, I'll let you have that thing that you really want. So what does that look like in dog training? Well, for example, let's say I'm walking my dog and we're coming up on a fire hydrant and my dog pulls me every time to all the fire hydrants my dog sees along our walk. So instead of letting my dog pull me, what do I want my dog to do? I want my dog to not pull. I want my dog to touch my hand with his nose first. So it's a way of stopping him from pulling. Or I just want my dog to touch his shoulder to my leg. So that's another way to stop my dog from pulling. So we approach the fire hydrant. The very second my dog sees the fire hydrant, I stop abruptly. And that abrupt stop gets my dog's attention. So he looks at me. Then I can ask for the hand touch. You touch your nose to my hand or touch your shoulder to my leg. So these would be behaviors my dog already knows how to do. I would have taught this outside of the walk. Once the dog does the behavior, I can say, go sniff, or yes, and then we can run over to the fire hydrant and the dog gets to go sniff it. I also have the option of saying, oh, what a good boy, and we continue our walk and we don't get to see the fire hydrant. We don't get to sniff it. So it depends on that moment in time what I'm looking for, but that's an example of pre-mac. The fire hydrant is the thing my dog wanted the most in that moment, and it was also the reinforcer for walking nicely next to me. So in each of these groups, there is a hierarchy, and an example would be in the food group, kibble versus freeze-dried liver versus boiled chicken or boiled hamburger patties cut up into little pieces. So those are all going to rate differently to your dog, and that's the hierarchy. That's just 3 items from the list. I mean, we know this is a huge list. It could be 20 items, 15 items. You don't need to rank them all, but you can rank the top 5 items or the top 3 items, and those are the ones maybe you work with. In toys, it's the same thing. Maybe your dog works for a tug toy, but you whip out a ball on a rope and your dog is going to work even better and be much more excited. You whip out a ball on a rope that squeaks or whistles as you throw it through the air, and your dog's really paying attention now. So that's a hierarchy of toys. Now, the pre-mac group, it's a little different. The hierarchy isn't quite the same. In the pre-mac group, it's what's important, most valuable to that dog in that moment. So while the fire hydrant example, in that moment, my dog wants the fire hydrant. That's the most valuable reinforcer. But in another moment, maybe at home or maybe playing in the yard, the fire hydrant is not even there. It's not a reinforcer that's even available. It's not even on my dog's mind. So it wouldn't be a high value reinforcer in that moment. So the pre-mac group, it's a little trickier. Like I said, it works a little differently. And by the way, who gets to decide the hierarchy? Not you, not me, the dog. The dog decides. So if we stick to the group of food, for example, you don't get to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go buy these commercial dog treats at the pet store and we're going to work for these. They're 1 calorie each and my dog loves them at home. You get to your dog training class and your dog wants nothing to do with them. You can't even get his attention. It's because you made that decision to use that item and it wasn't that high on your dog's hierarchy. So you need to consider what your dog finds most valuable, not what you think is valuable. Okay, so you got all your reinforcers sorted out. You figured out the top 3. You know which group you're using. How do you use them? The most common way that we use reinforcers is luring. That's L-U-R-E, lure. So with food, it looks like this. You want your dog to sit, so you put the food in front of your dog's face and you very gently and carefully lift it up over your dog's face. And as your dog looks up, following the food, the dog's bottom sits and touches the ground, and that is luring the dog into the sit. So that's usually how it starts. Once you've got that down, let's say you're adding a verbal cue to the behavior. So in the example of sit, you would say sit, and you wait, the dog does it. The very moment your dog's bottom hits the ground, that's when you use the marker. In this case, it's yes. And then you follow with the reinforcer. So right here is a really important mechanical, technical piece for proper dog training, good training mechanics. If you're at this point in your training where you can ask for a behavior and the dog will do it, keep the reinforcers in your pocket, in your treat pouch. Do not have the piece of food in your hand and then ask for sit. Don't have the ball in your hand and then ask for sit or stay. Have everything hidden. Everything should be in a pouch or a pocket. With toys, you can buy training vests that have huge pockets and you can put all kinds of dog toys in there. But you don't want the reinforcer out there. That's a common mistake. Everybody makes it. When you're in the moment and you're training, it's very common. I've done it. A lot of trainers have done it. It's part of your learning process when you're learning to train. But you want to get through that quickly. You want to keep those reinforcers hidden. If you're holding out the reinforcer when you're asking for behavior, that's bribing. That is not what we're doing. And positive reinforcement training is not bribing. We're not bribing our dog. If you feel that you have to bribe your dog to get them to perform the behavior, maybe your dog didn't really know the behavior as well as you thought, or maybe they do, but they can't do it in that situation. So that requires generalization. Generalization would be the next place you stop after you've been reinforcing behavior. You want to teach the dog to do the down in your house, the down in the driveway, out on a walk, in a parking lot. You want to teach the down in all kinds of places. That's generalizing. And once you've generalized the behavior, you can now adjust the frequency of your reinforcers. So you're now in what we call the maintenance phase of training. So I'm trying to think of the easiest way to put this. In adjusting the frequency of your reinforcers, typically we think of 4 basic reinforcement schedules. I'm not going to get into those right now, but I'll just tell you that there are 4 ways to adjust the frequency. You can do fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, or variable interval. But we're not going to geek out on that right now. That'd be another conversation for another day. So right now, all we care about is that we are adjusting the frequency. Maybe you only reward every other down or every other sit, or maybe you only reward the really good downs or the really hard ones where you're asking for your dog to do a down when something exciting is going on. So now you're adjusting the frequency. The most important thing to remember here is that you vary it and that you are unpredictable. The dog doesn't know when the reinforcer is going to happen. Again, this is the maintenance phase of training. This is where you live for the rest of you and your dog's training career, which goes on for your dog's life, by the way. It doesn't just end once you've taught the behavior. So you're now in the reinforcement phase. Reinforcements can be different now. You can choose from different groups, maybe food, maybe toys, maybe pre-mac it, depending on what's available. And oh, by the way, an important piece of the pre-mac group is affection. Some dogs will work for affection, and that's something you always have. Is it valuable enough in the moment? Well, that depends on what your dog thinks, right? So remember to use that one as an option. So now we come to the final question today. When do you stop using the reinforcers? Well, if you were listening just a few minutes ago, we were talking about the maintenance phase. That's where you and your dog live for the rest of your lives together. So that answers the question. When do you stop using reinforcement? Never. You never stop. Reinforcement is a tool, just like any other tool in dog training. It's a tool that you can use to get your dog to perform the behavior. So again, you may change your frequency of reinforcers. You may even change the type of reinforcers you're using, but they're always going to be there throughout you and your dog's life. It's also such a nice way to maintain a relationship with your dog, a really good positive relationship, which is going to pay you in dividends when you really need your dog to recall later on. That is a whole different podcast. We'll hit that on another time, but that's really important. A good way to maintain a nice relationship with your dog. So yeah, you're using reinforcers indefinitely, but in different ways and different kinds. And maybe it even gets to the point where you go for a nice walk with your dog, you get to a field where you are allowed to take your dog off leash, you play a game of fetch, which your dog finds very valuable, and that game of fetch has become the reinforcer for a really nice leash walk to the field. And then you put your dog back on leash and you walk back to the car. So that was still a reinforcer. So in summary, talking about reinforcers, we use them to teach behavior. They're often paired with a marker like yes, okay, or a clicker. And there are three big general groups of reinforcers. There are the food group reinforcers, the toys, and the Premack principle. Each group has its hierarchy, which is decided by the dog, not by us. And we start off with reinforcers. Basically, the most popular way is luring. There are other ways, but we're going to stick to luring today. And then once the behavior is taught, we keep all the reinforcers hidden and we ask for the behavior. And then we produce the reinforcer after the behavior has been given to us, after the dog has performed the behavior. We're always going to generalize behavior, teaching the dog to do it in different places, and then we're going to adjust the frequency at which we reward or reinforce. So you're always reinforcing in some way. I hope that clears up reinforcers for you. Get out there, have fun with your dog, and don't forget to reinforce. If you have an idea that you'd like us to talk about on our podcast, please shoot it to us over in an email at info@rpluscanine.com. That's info@rplus, the letter K, the number 9.com. We'd love to hear your ideas, and who knows, we might be using it in the future. Thanks for listening and happy training.